Should I just throw something? So yeah, no, I'm Steve Kemper. I'm a partner with PwC. So thanks very much for coming today and meeting with us. We want this session to be interactive as much as possible. So please feel free to ask questions or challenge us any way along a path. I've been doing consulting. I'm a supply chain guy by sort of trade, so a little boring, engineer with an MBA way back when. Then got into working in consulting and been doing supply chain consulting since '94. Textiles, I've seen consumer products, I've seen electronics. So I spent a decade in Silicon Valley, been in South America for half a decade, lived in China for half a decade. So been a sort of all over and seen it from that perspective. And I'll give you some of our points about smart manufacturing and give you some of the, although I don't have the gray hair, I am 55, so I'll give you a little bit of that gray hair in terms of some of our thinking. I probably went the wrong way there. Yeah, I can't work with this kind of, there we go. So we're going to talk mostly about smart factory. So we'll sort of give you a grounding what we mean by that, but we'll get in that. If there's some questions beforehand, feel free to ask them. We'll talk about what we see is struggles for companies getting started. I think that's sort of which comes first, the chicken and the egg, and we'll talk a little bit about that and really help you understand how to unlock that and how to get going. And then we'll also talk with you a little bit about the techniques we're using with our clients. I should step back. PricewaterhouseCoopers, that's what PwC stands for. Most of you think about it as your tax or your audit, company. Well, we sold off our consulting business in 2000, and then about 2005, we said, okay, IBM's got it, now let's go build it back. It's 1/3 of PwC's business. So in the US, it's a $6 billion business, is our consulting business. Everything from strategy through to execution. It's been the acquisition of Booz Consulting, multiple other assets that you put in there, some bearing point assets in IT. So we work with SAP, we work with all the technology providers and have the full stack. So sort of a pretty large consulting company across the globe. So that's who we are in a nutshell. I think we've heard a lot in the conference about everything from sort of the customer-facing side of things, so smart products, and what's happening out there around how to digitalize or digitize the whole customer interface, how to accelerate that. We're not going to talk about that part. We've also heard about, well, in this conversation we haven't necessarily, but how to connect the product development to the integrated supply chain, as well as how to connect the integrated supply chain, meaning your supplier, and how to put all that together. What we're really going to talk about here is much more of the smart factory. We can talk a little bit about how to connect up these two, but our real discussion is a little bit more inside the four walls. How do you get that mobilized, and what do you do to really harness the information you may have now, as well as bring in new information. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the digital enablers. We really I think some of you have sort of made it, have talked a lot about this, that your organization, sort of the people you bring in nowadays, and how you bring in that digital thinking is actually one of the critical enablers. We've had data and analytics around for decades. I mean, it existed when I started in the consulting business. We all had spreadsheets back then. We had that kind of things. We've had IT, big IT. We've had big tech for a long time. We've had networks. It's all been connected supply chains, maybe not connected, but we have a supplier. What's really changing now is we've got to bring in some more capabilities and unlock some capabilities. And how do we meld some emerging capabilities with some mature capabilities, sort of that peanut butter and the chocolate? How do we put it together and create something good? And I think that's something that we're finding a lot here, is how do you harness all those together and make them work together? So if you look at why now, I guess I'll be very old school, and I would say with manufacturing, supply chain, The principles haven't changed. Cost, quality, delivery, they haven't changed. Inventory, that's really what we're talking about. The principles of what you're trying to optimize haven't changed. What's happened is there are new techniques to enable that. There are new methodologies to enable it, but the principles of do I want a product less expensive, better quality, faster, with lower inventory, that hasn't changed. So it's not like that's changing in our world. What's happened nowadays is we have a wealth of new tools, these new digital technologies. We had digital technologies in the past. What I would argue is they were big T. So we had big ERP transformations. We had big product data management or PLM system transformations. We had big CRM system transformations. What we've got now is a little bit more of the small T. So we've got this small technology where we can go rapidly. We can rapidly innovate and iterate. We've got that, if you think about the Internet of Things, I would argue that we had ways of connecting data before. The Internet of Things just allows us to do it now cheaper. We had RFID for a long time. That's been around for a while. We had ways of connecting things together for a long time. What's happened is it's come down in price. It's gotten easier. It's gotten more open to do that. We had robots that existed in the past. Before, you had to put them in a cage. Now we have cobots. They've come down in price. They've come all those things. So you can actually iterate with them. You can fail fast and fail often, and then try a new technology. It's not like with the ERP implementations, it was 5 years, you failed, that's billions and billions of dollars. Here you can now do that. And so what's happening is we've got a wealth of ability to actually iterate fast and do it quickly, learn and evolve. That's much more going from the old days. I don't know if people in software manufacturing, they think about it sort of waterfall. That's how an ERP was done before. We planned it out, and then a year later we found out if we got there. Now, you can take something here on the floor, you can harness a piece of data together, you can put it together, and in 2 months, a month, you can find out if there's value there. I think we heard it from your presentation today. We hooked up these things, we looked at them, and then we said, oh wow, there's some value there. And then we changed it, and then we got some different value out of it. That's what's happening now. That's what's happening all up and down the chain. Now, what we also have here is the customer. The customer is now demanding things just in time. They want it the way they want it. They want one-piece manufacturing. We've been talking about manufacturing of one for a long time, but now the customer is demanding it. Now they really are forcing us into that space. And the cycle times to deliver, they're sitting here, Amazon's training all my kids, not all my kids, I only have 2 kids, but are training our kids to be a generation where I push a button and I get it in 2 hours, okay? And I don't care whether you only had blue in the factory, I want red, get it to me. So that's what's happening, is we've got this pull base that's just accelerating things, and we've got this push base where we move from sort of the big T to the little t. And you put those two together and there's an opportunity. There's a great opportunity for change. And I think that's what we're seeing. And a lot of people are saying, wow, how do I deal with all that change? And what we would argue is you actually have to get on with it and get going versus get paralyzed by the analysis. It's cheap enough, it's fast enough, you can go and make things happen, and you can learn. Now you gotta create an architecture of where you want to go eventually, and you got to get there, but you shouldn't be frozen based on creating that architecture and having it all perfect before you get going. So that's one of the things that we've seen here in some of the emerging trends. Juliane's going to talk a little bit. I guess any questions about this before Juliane sort of steps on to the next concept?
So Steve already highlighted that it's not about big, lengthy implementation anymore, but you can actually really do things differently with the digital tools that we have. And I don't remember if it was Kareem or Suresh who mentioned before, it's like a change in mindset as well, digital. That's very much what we believe as well. we call it a little bit provocative, like there's an app for it. So don't take that too literally. It's basically meant to symbolize that once you have figured out what your problem is and really know which challenge in your factory and for your, for example, operating equipment efficiency you want to address, you can go and develop an app or like a solution, a digital solution that helps you address that. And that can be sometimes 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, or 6 months implementation. But it's definitely a lot quicker and more agile than what we've seen in the past. That helps you actually to get to the outcomes quicker, or also know if something is not working and you can fail fast and change direction.
One of the things, oh, back up there, one of the things we found is you already have a wealth of information on the floor. I mean, you don't need to go, it's not like your machines aren't gathering information. It's not like you don't have all that can be mined. It's a question of how are you using it, how are you putting it together, and how are you mining it to drive insights. That's really the thing, because all those machines you have out there, either they've got work instructions, they've got timestamps that are going on, they've got IoT that could be connected up. You can use that for maintenance, you can use that for productivity, you can use that for quality. And if you think about the amount of quality you can drive out, in the old days you had specs that drove you to sort of one level measure. There's a whole nother way of getting those measurements and driving to that. So that's the kind of concepts that we're seeing our clients sort of drive through in some of these tools. It's really not, I agree that connecting them together is difficult. Finding a common platform for the machines to talk, really talk together is a challenge. So finding that layer, there is no holy grail there, but what we found is getting on with it and starting it is an important thing. Much like I think we've heard of, some of that supply chain connectivity, that people have gotten on with it and they have connected in other industries. It's more about getting moving on it than waiting.
Yeah, and here we just wanted to give a short reflection what we are seeing in the industry. And deliberately, these are not necessarily technologies here, but more outcomes. Because we think a lot of the discussions in Smart Factory that we see with our clients is very technology forward. But we believe the true benefits come when you think from the outcomes first, like what do you want to achieve, and then basically work backwards and think about which technology helps me get there from this big portfolio that's now emerging and becoming available to us. So I think throughout the last days, for those of you who joined the sessions, we covered almost all of these, so I feel like we had a good selection there, right? So horizontal integration, we heard a lot from Suchi, also with a very pragmatic approach of kind of this get smart, get moving, very quickly being able to implement the product and get some initial benefits with the grid. Then a lot about precision automation. We saw a lot of different innovations around the robotics, the cobotics, who are able to now also grip glass differently and treat like the more difficult materials. Digital twin of the factory, it's definitely something that we see emerging, but I wouldn't say there are too many people who perfected it yet. So same with predictive analytics, right? Everyone has a lot of data, but it's not always so easy to find out how you get the value out of it and where you like basically get the insights. But like product development, very important, like for the digital twin, right? Very often the starting point for this journey, where you start with the PLM and then create your twin and then track it through the whole manufacturing process, maybe even to the customer. And then you can gather information on the way and get conclusions about your business strategy, but also your manufacturing capabilities. Augmented reality enabled work instructions is also something we see more and more evolving, easier to support maintenance technicians who are going to do maintenance in the factories, so they don't have to have all their work instructions anymore in like a big booklet or call someone, but they have now smart classes and can, for example, get it right projected in the machine, which of the different parts they have to, for example, change. Another example is you can augment like workers. So instead of having to measure or draw like cutting patterns, now like an augmented reality solution could just provide you with a visual guidance and help you be like more effective and save you a lot of the setup time. So when I did my research, we already heard about the software example from Kareem earlier, and SAP, you already heard about yesterday what they're doing. But I thought the Hugo Boss example was very interesting, and there are actually 2 videos that you can also watch at home later, where the CEO is describing their strategy. I think one time he gave a TED talk, and another time it's like basically a plant visit where he talked to teams through the big vision. And I found that very interesting to hear from a CEO. He was pretty into detail and really engaged in the discussion, and he basically described how they started with connectivity, but then took this data and now basically on the journey to go into these more advanced optimization use cases that help them actually really change the game and like regarding cost and customer service. So we also wanted to discuss what keeps people from getting started and which roadblocks are we seeing. So we already got a good idea from you in like the first discussion. But I also wanted to walk you through what we are seeing in the industry. And that's not specific necessarily to textile, but this is like the general life cycle that we see in like a smart factory transformation. And I would say when I started 4 or 5 years ago on this topic, most of our clients were here. Awareness and a lot of paralysis. And I feel in the textile industry, maybe to some degree we're still here. Which means everyone heard about Industry 4.0 and the different buzzwords. Everyone got the idea that it's something big and probably worth a lot of money. But then there's just this wealth of technology providers, service providers, and and it's very hard to sort through the noise and figure out how do I get started, especially in like complex networks of like hundreds of factories and mills and supply chain partners and customers. It's not always easy to figure out like where to start. And that was actually what we saw a lot of companies being stuck in this phase and not moving because they're just trying to find the perfect start. But I would say probably like 18 months ago, we saw like a big push towards the middle, like the experimentation, proof of concepts, and also early adoption. But usually the proof of concepts were like very often machine driven and often also just in a very isolated factory or use case. Where we don't see a lot of companies yet is in the integration, so to truly have settled on a reference architecture of the different technologies, having tied all that together, and then also scaling it not only to one plant, but to their whole plant network. So there we see very few companies who have made that move actually. And that's like at the moment where we get called most of the time, people who are here and say like, we built a lighthouse facility. The technology works. We have something cool to show when our leadership comes in or like our customers. But the only thing that I saw moving in my P&L is the visitor costs. And I didn't see anything else move. Why is that, right? We see it, we touch it, we believe it has value, but I can't necessarily track it back, and that prevents me also from getting funding for the next phase. So that's where we often come in, and we will give some examples of how we think you can get to like this clear value proposition that will help you accelerate and fuel like your smart factory journey as well.
I would also say that, if you think about the industries that are sort of moving more over here, it's discrete manufacturers from a smart manufacturing perspective. So I could argue that, the chemicals companies and those types, they've already got their plants in a fairly connected and automated way. They're using it now for maintenance. So they're going to more of a smart maintenance side of things. From a run time in those, they can mine that data. But in discrete manufacturing, much more like the industrial products, those types of industries, as well as, you guys, a lot of your portion of your business is a discrete manufacturing business. This is the challenge of how do I take the different functions in a cell or in a line, and how do I knit it together to optimize those assets to actually get optimal productivity out of the facility, optimal quality, and actually minimize setup. Something that's been worked on for a long time, but that's where we're seeing now in sort of industrial products. They're sort of leading the way in some of that. Thank you.
So we would be curious, and we have actually a mentee survey, so those of you who have already practiced this a lot of times today. So we would just like to know if you can go to your mobile phone and use the app, like in which of the phases do you think your company is in right now? What did resonate?
So just go to menti.com. You don't have to download any app. Just go to menti.com and use the code 751326.
And you can think about the question in terms of your own, technology ecosystem within your own enterprise, or, how you think about partnering with your strategic suppliers, who might be your long-term business partners.
Awesome. Maybe just another minute. I see some more folks on the phone.
I think we should mention we surveyed a lot of companies on this too.
We did, and we actually just did a new survey that will be published probably next week. We're just in the final design with the National Association of Manufacturing in the US, and we surveyed I think 200 of their members. And I think you reflect a pretty good cut, if I remember the data correct. So most of the majority was also sitting here, mostly in the a little bit further along than here in the room, more on the experimentation, but then also several companies who already mentioned that they are in the integration.
Small sample size.
Small sample size, yes. I don't think we will be able to quote it.
Software consultants and friends.
But yeah, so I think what we continue to talk about should be actually beneficial for either company in the spectrum. So I think for people who are more in the front end, we can help give some ideas about how to move to the scale up and how to mature more, or how to get started. And for folks who are already in the integration and scale up, we will share some of the pitfalls that we see that keep people from literally accelerating this pathway, which we're seeing now with a lot of the discrete companies that I'm actually working with. I think we can probably skip the next question because we discussed it in the preview. So I will save you the question, what are your biggest roadblocks, because you already answered that at the beginning. Oh. Do you mind just going back to the presentation? So what we've seen in terms of things that prevent companies from getting started and what's helping them from really implementing getting the benefit out of it. It's very often not the technology or the capability of the technology itself, because the innovation actually matured quite a bit and a lot of things are enabled today. But it's often a dispersion, right? It's like, which one of these? So I think our emerging tech lab is actually monitoring 250 plus micro technology trends. So it's not artificial intelligence, it would be natural language processing, so one level deeper. And as a company, you need to make your bet, right? Which of the 250 technologies do you want to invest in? Because you can't pick all, or you will probably go crazy and not get a lot of value out of it. But that's what a lot of companies are struggling with. And then as well, a lot of times people get very excited about the technology, and I think we can all understand it because we think as well a lot of the things are cool. But I think more about oh, I saw a 3D printer, so let's buy a 3D printer. And very often the 3D printer ends up in the factory and nobody's doing something with it. So it's this kind of tendency to think about the tech first and implement it, but not really think about why am I doing it and what do I want to achieve with it. And then what we also see, and Suresh highlighted that a little bit, a lot of connect and not so much optimize at the moment. It's part of the maturity as well, but a lot of companies start with creating a dashboard. And you have the dashboard and you think it's kind of cool, it saves me time for my reporting, it gives me visibility. But then the question is, how can I turn that into business value, right? Hard dollars. And how can I, what can I do with this dashboard? Can I analyze the data to find patterns, and I can in the future react before the problem occurs? Or can I maybe find new insights about my customers in the data? So you need to think about what what you want to do, basically. And then often the lack of the reference architecture, which is what you said before about the integration, how do my different systems fit together, because there's a lot of innovation going on in the market, and I will come to that a little bit later. So what you bought, especially with a lot of the startups, like half a year ago, is not necessarily the same what you have today or where the company morphed to. And even the big players like SAP, they are also innovating a lot in this space, so also their capabilities are changing. So it's like a constantly forming landscape where you need to be kind of staying on top and understanding how that impacts your reference architecture and your IT and your company. Skill gap, yes, a lot of times people in the factory, especially in the US, are fairly old, not necessarily even have a smartphone at home, right? They're not naturally tech savvy. So a lot of times, also because a lot of times people think Industry 4.0 is very much aligned with automation. Also comes the fear factor with it. Do I lose my job if I support this initiative? So there are a lot of dynamics going on. And then also mismatching the skill set. Operating a machine or like a maintenance operation with an augmented reality, glasses, and having it more data-driven is often very much against the nature of the maintenance manager who did it the last 20 years based on his experience. And often when you go to the data-driven decision-making, it's not necessarily always in line what people thought the reality is. So that can create some difficulties in the adoption as well. And even though we are not a manufacturer, I think PwC overall has a pretty interesting story for the digital upskilling. So we recognize that a lot of our business can be automated in the future, potentially will fall away. So, and that we also need to have new tools, and our consultants need to leverage these digital tools to serve you better. So we also trained like a lot of our organization to kind of drive the citizen-led innovation, where people not only accept the technology but also think about how to drive like value from it. So there's a lot of research online, or if you're interested in the topic, I'm happy to chat about that as well. Then I already said that when we looked at the life cycle, unclear economics, that will eventually kill you in the initiative. Because you have to make investments, and at a certain point of time, people will ask for a return, and you need to be able to prove it. But also the investment decisions have to change. So on Monday I was at a conference with CFOs, and we actually told them, you also need to help your operations team to think about the value proposition, right? You can help them measure the value, but you also need to think differently about how you improve initiatives. We talked about it in the US, people expect a lot less ROI, or like shorter ROI, like 12 months, 18 months, than in Europe, and that's something that I see as well in a lot of cases. But a lot of these investments, you have to think about the bigger picture, and not only about like the very short-term isolated ROI for like one machine or one facility. It's more like the capability building, and what will it get you like 2, 3, 4 years along the line? How will it enable you to serve your customers differently and to differentiate yourself in the competition? So we don't want to leave you only with the challenges. So we also want to share some of the criteria for success that we've seen, and that's also based on like a study. We do it every 2 years with like 1,200 companies worldwide, so it's usually a global study. We kind of try to dissect what are the companies that are already digital champions, what are they doing differently than other companies. And this is a pretty busy chart, I don't expect you to read all that, but if I walk into a client and I ask them like, what's your smart factory strategy? Or like, what's your vision for that? The clients who are mature can pull out a picture like that. Or they have some other visualization of what's going on and where their, so to say, their vision is going and where they want to arrive at a certain point of time. And the benefit of creating a picture like that for yourself is that you kind of understand your position in the value chain today, and then you think about how can this innovation actually help me, but also my supply chain partners create value and do things differently in the future. So it's just a nice way to think through the different dynamics that are ongoing, but then also help you kind of envision the art of the possible, right? Thinking not only about 3D printing, but what do I want to do with it? Do I want to print spare parts? Do I want to try to print shoes like Adidas and Nike are doing now? Like, for what do I want to use it, and where in the value chain would that fit in? So it's just usually the mature companies have something similar like that, where they just say like, sure, you ask me what my vision is, this is it. So that helps, because it helps you make decisions along the way. And then there are like 3 other big points, or 4 actually. One is like, you need to understand how you assemble this ecosystem of the technology partners and the innovations and technologies, and how you make that fit for your own company. And then you also need to think about the use cases, like which problems do I want to solve with this technology? And you can create a use case catalog like that. It's a copy from one of my clients. And then you can think about prioritizing them. You will think about interdependencies between different use cases. And then you can develop a roadmap from there, basically. And what I said before, like this clear path to monetization is important too. And what we hear a lot, and we see companies focused a lot on machine. But manufacturing very often isn't not working because of the machine, but it's because the operator didn't show up, or doesn't know how to run the machine, or the material isn't there, or the flow isn't there, that your machines are, and your line isn't completely balanced, so you have challenges there. So we think, like also thinking about OEE, it's great if you can improve your operating equipment efficiency or your machine uptime by 20%. But so what? Does that mean now your people go home 20% earlier? Or does it mean you want to move products in there and produce 20% more? Do you have customers for that? So you need to get to these more meaty questions. And very often in companies, the people who are tasked with optimizing the KPIs on the shop floor are not the same people who are making the other decisions around new product phase-ins or quantities, or even footprint decisions if you have optimized a lot of your factories, right? And you can potentially even consolidate. So that's like one of the big things that we see people stuck and companies stuck, especially the ones that move already along the experimentation, in this micro value proposition. So they're trying to justify the investments with like the business case per plant. But that's not often very attractive, especially if you have smaller plants that only have like 20, 40 million of revenue, right? Like if you have already to implement like 2 or 3 million of infrastructure to be connected, it's harder to argue like, you know, the business case for that is if you say like, this enables me to win potentially a new business and bring business in that I couldn't do before because I didn't have the money to spend to build a new plant and my capacity was constrained. So that's just what I want to encourage you to also think about. Then we hit it a little bit here on the bottom, which is definitely not justified. It's like you need to have your digital transformation, you need to lead it with a human-centric approach. And that's maybe a little bit of like a buzzword, equally like design thinking. But what we mean by that is that you should co-develop the solutions that are with people who use them at the end. And you should develop solutions that people are excited about using. Because otherwise it will fail and they will not adopt them and you will not see the value. Especially like a lot of the apps or tablets that I see in manufacturing, they are very unwieldy for the operators to handle, right? They often wear gloves or safety equipment and it's hot and they're sweaty, and I don't know if you try to use your iPhone or like unlock it when sweaty hands, it's usually not working. So you want to test for these things, because if you give people these tools and new applications and innovations and they just frustrate them and they make their life harder, they will not go ahead and create the value we're hoping. I had a client who did actually pretty excellent change management. So when we talked to the operators on the shop floor, they had installed like they hooked all the machines up to a system to get real-time OEE, operating equipment efficiency. And we asked the operator like, hey, how did that change your life? How did it make your shift more smooth or better? And he just said like, at the moment I don't see it, but they tell us engineering really benefits from us, and product management and product innovation really benefits from the data we put in. So they went into this dashboard that was very poorly designed, had to take off the gloves, log in, then literally had to scroll down 400 machines and pick the right one because it wasn't optimized. They didn't know it's at that workstation and that there are only 3 machines at the workstation. And then they had to find one of the 20 error codes that was the best. Most people lose patience there, right? And they just pick the first best thing they find, and then your data is garbage and you can't do analytics with it. So it's just really important to keep that in mind. That's why we think it helps to adopt like a design thinking approach, and you don't need to go all in that, right, and go super crazy. But I think the spirit of design thinking is just something that makes a lot of sense. And it's basically to put the user in the middle and think about how can I create a solution that creates value to them. And actually, we usually see that the plant teams are super excited to collaborate with you on that if you're like honest about listening to them. And often leadership is worried like, oh, what if we can't give them what they want, then they will be mad with us, or there's some fear for the interaction. But we still believe it's worth trying because the benefits outweigh the risk. And another benefit is with this agile iterative approach, you can also test it a lot quicker, and you don't invest money in a solution that you at the end are not using, or that you forgot something because you didn't field test it that was important. RFID, Steve mentioned it's around for a long time. A lot of my clients in the discrete industry have a lot of steel and metal in their plants. It's not very good for RFID. So you have to think about, does it work in my environment as well? And a lot of the things you will see when you actually test it. And often we assume as well that we know what people want. I think every one of us fell into that trap before. And I think one of the really good examples for that is the Eurostar train that connects Paris to London. I think it runs roughly 2.5 hours. There's actually a pretty interesting TED talk about that too. And the engineers were trying really, really hard, and they spent a lot of money to find innovation that helps to shorten the journey from 2.5 hours to 2. But then what people really wanted was like working internet connection on the train so that they can make like the time more worthwhile on the train, or like more entertainment, or like a restaurant with like good food. So that shows you that you don't always have to push like the technology limits, but you need to think about what's like the right answer for my specific situation. In that spirit, we wanted to know like, what have you heard about design thinking? Is that something your company is already doing? Do you think it's more like a buzzword? What's like your sense of it? I have 2 people who are very fast.
They would carry that over from last time.
You can get maybe to the 10 people, then we have at least a representative sample here of the room. Does someone from the people who regularly applies it want to share like an example how you applied in your company?
It's not my factory, but we did it in a factory for a paper manufacturer.
Absolutely.
And we came out with a very funny user interface because the factory people said they wanted to have it like that. They wanted to automate the interface between production and warehousing and loading. And they were using RFID in a combination with pallets and with the gates where they were loading. The idea was basically to bring down loading errors to 0 and to have 100% transparency. Basically, they came up with a user interface that was made from like on a police car, one of these road agents. And if you load it to the wrong one, it starts to go up there. And if something and the problem is there, they had a rope at the loading gate to pull that. It was interesting because we had all kinds of funny ideas what we wanted and we thought like it should be applied, but then they basically came out into something like that. I found it funny and they're super happy with it. They're down to 0 errors.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great example. Anyone else wants to share? Or maybe someone who said we tried it but somehow didn't work for whatever reason. That would be interesting maybe for the group to hear as well. If anyone wants to put themselves out there.
Yes, I can share it from a different side. I worked for Target for a long time. I was actually part of a design thinking grassroots effort to
Yeah.
use the business cases. And we did, for those who didn't hear, I started a design thinking group at Target Corporation, and it was really funny for probably 5-6 years ago. We did a bunch of design thinking boot camps, and a lot of our consumers were telling us they wanted like the Target drive-up things and the Target delivery, but the leadership at the time firmly believed that that was not the answer. So we kept doing these human-centric design boot camps, and that was always the answer. And now that CEO is gone, and now I'm seeing the commercials for all these things that are coming out. So
Interesting.
it didn't work at the time, but now it's working now.
I think what you highlight there, you actually highlighted indirectly two things, right? One is also leadership's willingness to listen, or in general, like the operations' willingness to test this as well. But then also the ability of the team to ask good questions, right? Because not always do customers know what they want. They think they know what they want, but then at the end they're not using it. So that's actually another pitfall of design thinking that we often hear. So I think one, you probably can attest to that, you always try to ask like these open questions, right? Not the one like, would you like to have a drive-in, but you're like, what would make your shopping experience more pleasant? So there's a whole science around like how do you ask questions and how do you actually create this open atmosphere for people to willingly share with you. And we actually thought and debated a lot if we want to do a little exercise with the group as well, but we at the end decided against it because we weren't sure how big the group turns out. But like you can try it even at home with your partner or your family. Like just think about optimizing the shopping experience and try to understand like what does one person, like your partner in that case, how would they like to have it changed, and then try to develop a solution for that. And like very quick iterations, usually like 5, 10 minutes. So there are a lot of exercises online that you can do just to experience it. And you will see what you write down and what you sketch out as like a solution. You have to present it out to your partner then as well. And very often they're like, what the hell did you draw? It has nothing to do with what I told you. Like, how can you understand it so differently, right? So it's like a lot about communication as well, and just, active listening and understanding, and then being able to communicate that and tie a business case around it, so that you get the support you need to implement it. Do you want to switch back to the...
I think in the shop floor, this is actually critical because people on the floor know how things work better than any manager, or better than any director or anything like that. So really unlocking that talent. A lot of the high commitment workforces start to unlock that talent and harness it, and that's when you really get the power of it. I think the connected supply chain, you're bringing together customers and suppliers. Here you're really bringing together technologists, you're bringing together manufacturing people, R&D people, and production engineers, and putting them together. In between that, you can actually find a lot of value. I think the challenge, as we've mentioned before, is connecting all that data, not where the opportunity is, but having those conversations. You'll really find some great insights around what are the problems and what are potentially some really easy solutions to solve them.
Yeah, that's true. So usually these workshops are always cross-functional where we do. And then we didn't have any plant managers here today, but when you think about a lot of plants are lean or are at least trying to be lean, so you have a lot of the employee suggestion. And I always a lot of times actually lean people are like, oh, Industry 4.0, I don't think that fits with lean. And I tend to disagree. I think it can help you kind of to a lean on steroids, because you get a lot of this real-time visibility of data that in the past you could just do in like ex post, and now it gives you the opportunity to react in real time and also to sometimes even predict and prevent something, because it's better to know at 8 a.m. that you will not hit your production target of the day, instead of having this conclusion at 8 p.m., right? So you can't counter steer anymore. You can't call people to come to work. You can't fix the machine quicker. You can't expedite material if you just know it after the fact. And then also with the employee suggestion boxes that we see in factories pretty commonly already today, this can be very easily incorporated in that kind of thinking as well. And if you have like good trainings and as well like innovation showcases that come, like your employees can see, they usually have ideas as well. Like if you give them smart glasses in the break room to experience or like to play around with, very often they come up with ideas how they could use it to make their life better or like to incorporate it in their work. So we made very positive experiences with that. And then a lot of companies implemented also like the internal Facebook, so to say, where people can chat and exchange messages. And if you create a buzz in one of the factories, that also creates a lot of pull from other factories, right? First of all, if you get the financial results, the plant manager of the other plant wants the innovation too, because it will help them make the numbers. And the people also are excited if they hear that, it worked very well for their peers. So, think about that when you start your journey, and try to incorporate some of the end users in your process. What we see as well very often with clients who already build a lighthouse facility, if you don't know the before and you walk in these lighthouse facilities, it's not necessarily obviously cool, right? Not always does it look like super different than like a normal plant you would walk in. So we always recommend our clients take pictures of the before, right? Or make a video about the before so that you can highlight afterwards what did change. So very visual, because I walked into a lighthouse facility of my client and he was like, oh, we automated that. It's like now we have this line to weld. And I'm like, great, what was it before? He's like, oh, there were actually 40 people working there and we had a lot of security issues and people were like injured almost every second day because the material was the line wasn't well designed and not very ergonomic. So and we're like, oh, that's actually pretty cool if you tell us the story behind it, but I didn't see it by just looking into factory. So think about that as well. If you develop something, always show the before and after. That makes your whole message and transformation more powerful. If you combine that with like a voice of the operator who gives a statement about how it benefits them, that's like a pretty good start for like a change management campaign as well. What we wanted to conclude with is just a very pragmatic way of how we usually work with our clients to get started. So the 10-step process, so to say. Think about the challenges that you want to solve, right? Really your pain points. Is it quality? Is it uptime? Is it skill shortage? So pin that down and be really clear about what's the problem you want to solve. Then think about which use cases would help address it. Is it predictive maintenance? Is it maybe just a visualization dashboard with an alerting function? Does it have to be automation and a robot? So that helps you narrow down a bit like your scope for the transformation. And then talk to vendors. Every vendor, consultants and tech vendors and startups will be excited to come to you and talk and present their solutions, right? For them, it's important to get their innovations out. And for you, it's a great learning experience. You can ask all the questions and you can also learn about what's out there today. So that's always what we recommend as well. And we see like our more mature clients usually having 1 or 2 people in the team dedicated to just screening what's out there, going to conferences and learning about the art of the possible. Then think about how these different technologies fit together, right? Do you have an ERP? Do you have an MES system? Like which functionality is already covered by the tools that you have, and maybe how can you just switch those on or change it? Then which new technologies do you need? And sometimes for the dashboarding, there are also like a lot of the free tools out there. You mentioned that before, a lot of the technology is already free, right? You just need to sample it in a way. So there's you can work with your IT team there to get a good sense of what do you have and where are the gaps basically for your use cases. And then instead of going into different plants and doing like one use case in each plant, that's kind of how we started off as well. But now after like 1 or 2 years of learning, we actually concluded it's better to do it in one plant first, maybe even in one line, to really show the change and how all these different use cases interplay with each other. To get a much more powerful story there. And then the change management begins with like, tell a story, emphasize the value that's delivered. So think about before when you do the business case about how do I want to quantify the value? Is it time saved? Is it accidents prevented? Is it more output? Kind of develop your dashboard and your metrics for the specific case. That's not always easy, by the way. So we're also trying to do a lot of outcome-based pricing with our clients where we get paid based on the value we create. And believe me, a lot of times I spend a lot of time in the contracting phase trying to tie it back to the P&L and the different metrics and create like a very logical cause and effect relationship. And usually in a plant there's not always only one activity going on, but then there's also your lean project and another project, so it's not always completely easy to get to this business case and the value tracking. So don't think it's just like a quick afternoon exercise. That might require some thorough thinking and understanding of how your company operates as well. Then you want to learn from your implementation in the small scale, what does that mean for my operating model, right? In terms of risks for the scale up. A lot of companies have a good IT department, they have manufacturing engineers, but they don't have anyone who knows the operating technology well, right? Who can go program PLCs, who can go perform maintenance in like a cobot and things like that. So that's a decision you will have to make, like where do I build this capability, right? Will it sit in the plants? Will it sit in IT? Will I create a dedicated team for that? So these are like also the bigger picture questions that you frame up basically through your pilot there. And then for the scale up, you need to think about the governance structure of the program, like who should be on your steering team, who can help you answer these macro questions that we discussed before, right? Really help you to get the best value out of it, thinking about footprint, revenue, positioning, and so on. Make sure that the right people are on there, and then launch the roadmap after you create it. So that's kind of our quick 10-step way into what Steve said at the very beginning. Our mantra is kind of get smart and get moving, but don't get smart too long. It's like a parallel process, right? You want to experiment and learn while you're learning about the market and the technical possibilities, because there's no cake yet. There's nobody that can give you a turnkey smart factory today. It's always a lot of ingredients, and for every company, it's just a different answer of how you need to bake your personal cake. Right? So, yeah, I think that's what we prepared for today. But we are obviously there for any questions during the break or now.
Any questions?
About you mentioned outdated funding mechanisms.
Can you repeat it?
Can you talk about outdated funding mechanisms?
Yes.
I assume you're uniquely situated to.
Yeah. So very often it's just like when you think about your CapEx request, right? It's like usually you have to fill out the template and give your capital expenditure, what you're planning to sell, to buy, and then you make your little business case with like the benefits you assume, and that gets submitted. But very often that's based on like factory level, right? Because that's kind of what the person who makes the request can control. And very often we see like some of the infrastructure or like the more long-term value add capability building funding decisions get actually declined or deprioritized versus a lot of the smaller that are maybe more like piecemeal but not really fitting into the big picture. So we think also for the business case templates for Industry 4.0, there should not only be like the KPI and the factory perspective, but also like this perspective of, can it enable me to do business differently, right? Quantifying the impact on capacity and willingness to win, ability to win new business, and these kind of things, which are often neglected. Or best case, I gave the example, if you have 5 factories, you get 20% more capacity out of each of them, you could in theory close one. But that's the cost avoidance, right? Most plant managers today don't get credit for cost avoidance. They get credit for cost savings, like year-over-year cost savings. And we believe like there's a lot of potential, especially in this capacity story, because a lot of industries, especially in the US, are capacity constrained in the current climate, but they don't want to invest in a new facility because they are not sure how the long-term business outlook will be. So we believe this cost avoidance story is actually a pretty strong one too, but most of the time that's a discussion that we would have in the steering committee to make sure that the people get credit for that too. So that's like probably the most obvious example for that.
I would say the portfolio concept.
Yeah.
So I mean, if you're coming up, I'd
It's a
liken
good
it to new product development. If you're coming up with a new to the world sort of platform that's going to have lots of derivatives off of it, it's very hard to fund it on that first product's life. You've got to fund it on all the derivatives off of there. Sort of thinking through that, it's a challenge for the the finance people to think through, how do I actually look at it in that type of portfolio methodology? But that's what we've seen, and that's what we talk to people also, is you're unlocking a broader capability.
Yeah.
Are they always quantifiable in your
No.
opinion, or sometimes
No.
it
No. They're definitely not, but there's also value that you can try and apply values to some of those other things. The finance guys get a little, when you start applying some softer to the ROI, they get a little nervous. But we have worked on alternative models to sort of say, sustainability, tying in those aspects and all that side of things, and actually trying to quantify the benefits. So we've got some complex models we use in certain spaces and bring some of those principles in. But at the end of the day, the finance people like to come back to, wait a second, I need it to be a 1, and I need to know that that's the one I looked at before.
That's why you want to work with your finance people early on, make them guilty as well in like the calculations, so to say. But yeah, I mean, I guess it's also often just a question, how much time do you want to spend on quantifying it, right? You can take it, it's just a decision. Like, I'm starting a project on Monday, and that client has a very big plant network, and they invest a lot of money. And one of my work streams that I will be working on is exactly helping them to really develop the tracing down to the P&L and make it tangible. We don't know completely yet how it will shake out, but we know we have a dedicated team to figure that out. So it's definitely not easy, but I think there's a lot of potential in cracking that code and thinking about that.
A brief comment to that. What we have seen is that what is quite interesting is if you actually take the finance side down on the shop floor, we have seen that especially in the paper industry that it has even worse margins. It's really not a happy place to be. And they were trying to basically expose in a shift how much money you made or lost.
Mm-hmm.
And actually say, okay, this is interesting because the future of a mill depends on how good the people in there operate. So there's a natural interest of bringing the finance view together with the operations view.
Yeah, that's a great example. So
sometimes they don't have money and they wouldn't know, they will close the mill, and they would like to have the transparency what is actually driving it.
So we call that the win the hour use case. You want to let the shop floor know if they won the hour, basically every hour, and that ties back to the financials. Like, by not having the spare part, now I lost X revenue or something like that. So these are like ways. I think it's actually easier to quantify it from like the bottom up in a lot of cases than trying to come from the top down.
Any other question?
I would say just for the companies further down the chain, all these principles apply in the warehouse too. So, you know, if you think about right now what's going on in the transformation in omni-channel and the need to pick at one or pick at a case or pick at a pallet, all these principles apply down there. And probably in the US, you know, people were asking where are we seeing a lot of transformation. You're seeing a huge amount of transformation in that space because there's a lot of information already digitally captured in that, and you have a lot of human capital in there. But it's a tricky one to sort of automate the different flows of case, pallet, and interbox. So.
I would say in other industries, and you know, in maybe apparel, maybe we'll get there in some core and carryover product, is that the idea of opening up the smart factory to connected supply chain is having a big impact on design for manufacturing, and I think that's still the missing piece in the apparel industry between designer, PLM, and placing the order. Now, you know, the folks who work for you and your brands and sourcing, often it's a one-shot deal, or if it's a strategic partnership, maybe you'll have industrial engineers help them with the layout of the line, but what's missing still in the ecosystem is that live feedback and the shared incentives and how a change of design or change in material can improve productivity. And I think, you know, the most advanced retailers in certain product categories, maybe outside of apparel, are a bit further along than the apparel industry, and that joint partnership with their strategic suppliers and leveraging automation and insights on the factory floor to inform future design and tweaks of products. And then for those of you who might be making complex apparel products, you could definitely see a need in the coming years for when you assess your strategic suppliers. It's not, for the last few years, it's been about, are they taking me into new markets with lower cost labor? The future really is, are they making the right investments in automation and insights to help be a better business partner in the design cycles? One way to think about the future.